For a long while now, I have been seeing a lot of other macaron bakers and macaron artists using this technique of piping macaron batter on top of macaron batter before baking it, and not in like a character mac way, but just in like a random design kind of way. I've really been wanting to give it a try, though I'm kind of scared to do it, but today's the day. So I've got all of my regular things for normal French method macaron shells. I have my 804 piping tip that I really like to use to pipe my regular shells, and then I've got a much smaller piping tip that I'm going to use for the details. I really like to use the French style meringue when I'm in my home kitchen. That means room temperature egg whites. Once that gets a bit frothy in my mixer, I'm streaming in sugar with a bit of cream of tartar mixed in. Then I'm adding my colorant once that is all incorporated. Today I'm using this kind of breakfast blue teal kind of color that I just love. And then I'm going to continue whipping that to really stiff peaks. If you're a little bit concerned about if you are under or over whipping your meringue, you might want to check out some of my newest Exploring Macaron Fails tutorials. After I get that meringue to really stiff peaks, I personally like to transfer my batter out to a larger, wider bowl. I think that not only for purposes of filming, but just in general, I think it gives me more surface area to be moving and folding my batter around. And I also think that it allows me to see what is going on, especially on the bottom of my bowl, a lot easier. But with macarons, I know I've said this time and time again, you really need to find what works best for you, for your system, for your kitchen. And so what works for me may not always work for you, and that is okay. This is just my method, and I hope that it is helpful. I hope my tips are really useful, but also they may not be useful for you. So take everything I'm saying in any of my videos with a grain of salt. I really like to add in my dry ingredients in about 3 additions. The dry ingredients, of course, are my almond flour and my powdered sugar. Most often in my home kitchen, I don't go through the process of using a food processor, but I do really like to sift them to make sure that I've taken out any lumps that may cause a bit of bumpiness on the top of my macaron shells later. After I've got everything just combined in my bowl here, all of my ingredients are finally together. I'm just keeping this batch all the same color, and so I don't have to worry about separating this into any other bowls or anything like that. And as you can see here, it is really stiff. When I lift up my spatula, the batter just kind of sticks, doesn't really move anywhere, it's not flowing down. And so what I want to do is continue to fold and move this batter around my bowl to deflate the air enough so that when I lift my spatula up, the batter should flow down in a ribbon. And when I look at the batter in my bowl after I've done that, it should gradually, within about 30 seconds, kind of look a little bit smoother. Not 100% like glass lake smooth, but it should definitely flow back a bit. So we want to be careful we're not over mixing, want to be careful about not under mixing. For me, this was the first time ever that I was trying this macaron batter on macaron batter technique that was not a character mac. So I was quite nervous. I didn't know if I should be, under mixing some of my batter for the top details or over mixing a little bit. But I decided just to go with my regular standard perfect ribbon stage batter for everything, and actually the results were phenomenal. So I would recommend you, whatever your normal is for macaron batter, if you're using this method, that would be perfect. So once I reach that stage, I'm going to transfer it to my 2 piping tips, the 2 piping bags I have fitted with those piping tips, and I'm obviously going to put more batter into the larger tipped piping bag and then just a little bit into the one with the smaller tip. First things first is I have my Silpat here. I have a template underneath just to make sure everything's the same size. And I'm going to pipe normal macaron shells. I am just piping down. I'm using my hands and my wrist to guide me to press down for a few seconds, release the pressure, twist away, so I don't have so much of anything that is pulling up or that's going to lead to needing to tap the trays to smooth out any of the shells very much. And then once I get these shells piped, I'm actually going to let them sit for like 10, maybe even 15 minutes before I do anything to them. I want that skin that we're usually looking for before we get them into the oven to already be forming before I pipe on any details. I actually don't know for sure if it would be okay to pipe the details on right away. I had just heard from some other bakers that is what they recommended from their trial and error. And so because it worked for them, I gave it a try and this method worked for me. So after I could touch the shells and not come away with any batter on my fingertips, I went in to create my designs. Now, I am super partial to like swirly things. If you ever look at any papers or anything that I did, any notebooks from basically elementary through high school, there were always swirly, curly, cute designs on everything I have ever done. And that still holds true. I love to doodle swirly things everywhere. So I decided to do that on my macarons. I just came in with kind of one branch of swirls from one side and then another branch of swirls from the other side. And then once again, I just did that on all of my macaron shells and then just let that portion also rest enough. So actually these macaron shells have been resting a lot longer than most of my macarons rest before they get into the oven. I would probably recommend, because of the additional time that they're resting before they go into an oven, unless you have access to an industrial size oven, if you are like me and you're baking one tray at a time, definitely take that into account. And if the longer your macarons rest, especially if you live in a humid location and if you're in a really, really dry place or something like that, you might not want your macarons, trays and trays and trays of macarons sitting out resting this long and then resting while the others bake. So I did 2 trays and they were totally all fine, but you might want to be a little bit careful if you did, 5 or 6 or 8 trays. You really might run into some difficulties in the end there. So just be a little cautious with how many you make at once, especially in the beginning if you're new to this kind of a technique. After resting a bit more just to make sure everything was dry to the touch, they went into my oven and baked exactly the same amount of time as always, same temperatures, everything was just like normal. I realized as they were baking that it was a little bit too much teal for me, so I went ahead and made some white shells to pair with them on the bottom just to make them a little bit brighter. And I also decided that I wanted to use some edible gold luster dust to really highlight these designs and just give a ton of really cool texture to these shells. I love painting on my macaron shells, but sometimes it takes a lot of painting to get some depth to what you've created and, a lot of highlighting or shadows or whatever to make something look really textured and nice. Otherwise, it has a really nice painted effect, but it still is just, painted. So I absolutely am now obsessed with this idea of painting something like gold or another color. I think a silver would be really pretty, or a pearl or something like that would just be amazing on top of these shells. So you get that texture as well as the color. So cool. If you are new to painting, especially with things like luster dust on macarons, I really like to use a clear extract like almond extract, or a tiny bit of a clear alcohol like gin, just to make the luster dust turn from a powder into a paintable liquid. And trust me, you barely need any liquid, especially if you're just doing a handful of macarons. It is super easy. Whereas with a gel food coloring, you can water that down purely with water. If you're using a luster dust, I do not recommend turning that into a liquid with water. It gets a little bit clumpy and weird. All right, so here you can see them just next to each other. The plain old macaron batter on macaron design is cool, but with that gold luster dust, it is just freaking incredible. I am just obsessed with these. The macaron shells, the really cool point about this is they come out of the oven basically done and decorated. And if you add something like luster dust, that also basically takes no time at all just to dry up. So by the time you have them all painted, you can basically go in and start filling already. I am just going to fill these really quick with a simple chocolate ganache. I have tons of tutorials and recipes for dark and white chocolate ganaches and buttercreams and all kinds of fillings in my other videos. So I will save the filling content for another time. I really just wanted to focus on this technique for the decoration of the macaron shells right here. But I do want to mention before our time is up that even with that additional batter on top of the macaron shell, it did not affect in any way how these matured or anything. 24 hours in the refrigerator or freezer and they were good to go, mature just like any other macaron. I did not notice any difficulties or differences or anything like that. So I really hope you give this technique a try. If you are inspired by this or any of my other videos, I would love to see what you did. I would love to hear how things went. So definitely tag me on Instagram so I can see your cool results as well. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.